Well, it's election season, so today we are breaking down the economic proposals and potential impact from our top two candidates. And I'm going to do something a little bit different today. We are releasing part one on the podcast today. We're going to actually look at Kamala Harris's economic proposals. And next week, we're going to look at Donald Trump's. But if you just can't wait until then and you want to hear part two, you can actually go to my YouTube channel, Nate Skelly CFP. And I've got both videos up today. And so if you can, go ahead and check out the YouTube channel. And of course, I'd love for you to subscribe to those videos there on the YouTube channel as well. So let's get into it. Part one of the Financial Pathway podcast episode on Trump versus Harris.
Welcome to the Financial Pathway podcast. We're here to help you go to the next level in your finances with practical advice from speaker and financial planner Nate Skelly.
Okay, so today I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. I know that's not perfectly possible, but I'm going to do my best. I'm not trying to be Fox News here or MSNBC. So if you're looking for big headlines and superlatives and shock value, unfortunately, you're not going to get that today. It's just like that old show. I think that's from Dragnet. I actually never watched it, but you know that old saying, just the facts, ma'am? I feel like that's where I'm trying to be today. Just the facts, ma'am. I'm just going to try to give you the objective truth as much as I know how to relay that information. You know, there's a lot of political rhetoric that gets thrown around these days. You know, Harris says we're going to reduce food and housing costs, but that's not an economic policy. That's just a campaign slogan. You know, Trump says we're going to bring jobs back to the U.S. We're going to stop them from going to Mexico and China, but that's also not a policy. Okay, so I'm not going to try to wade into political rhetoric. I want to look at specifics, actual outline plans or proposals that have some structure around them. So that's what we're going to try to explore today. There's been a lot that's been said by both campaigns, and we want to examine what's been said to the degree that the candidates have actually given details about their plan. So if you're like me, you do get a little bit tired of the sloganeering. You know, Trump is Hitler, Kamala is Joseph Harris, or Kamala is Joseph Stalin, not Joseph Harris. You know, fascist, communist, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of mudslinging, a lot of food fighting, a lot of name calling, but a lot of that is unhelpful to the actual conversation or debate to be had about the actual impact and the merits of various policies. So it's easy to make general statements, you know, about bringing down inflation. It's easy to say we're going to make housing affordable. It's easy to say we're going to create jobs. Of course, every politician wants those things to happen. Both campaigns are going to promise to be good for the economy, but what effect would their policies have on that outcome? So in today's episode, we're going to start with Kamala Harris's campaign and her policy proposals, and then we'll cover Trump second. And then we also want to talk about the potential impacts from these policies. So what I did is I went to Kamala Harris's website and looked at specifically what are the things that, in her own words, she is proposing to do, and looked at the things that actually have some structure and some specificity around it. And so I'm going to start here with tax credits and deductions. We're going to look at several different items. And again, I'm not going to try to extrapolate. I'm not going to try to read into general statements that don't have actual policy proposals. I'm just going to stick with the things that have specifically been said and deal with, deal with those things as they are instead of trying to fill in the gaps with my own thoughts about what these things might mean. So let's start with tax credits and deductions. The child tax credit, one policy that Kamala Harris has proposed, is to raise the child tax credit to $6,000 in the year that a child is born. Now, currently, the child tax credit is $2,000 for each eligible child. So a $6,000 tax credit in the year that the child is born would, of course, be a big benefit to those who have kids to offset the costs of a baby. If you're a parent, you know that having kids is not cheap, and hospital bills are not cheap, and new supplies and diapers and all those things can be quite expensive. So certainly that would come as a welcome benefit, I think, for those who are going to be having kids. It would incentivize also more children being born, potentially. You know, you think about, there's a lot of countries right now, and this is not just in the United States, there's a lot of countries, especially developed countries, that have very low birth rates that have been trying to offer similar type incentives to encourage people to have more kids. A lot of European countries, in Japan, in China, really across the board, a lot of countries that are more developed and wealthier, people just aren't having kids. And really, the replacement rate that you need, the replacement birth rate you need in a country is 2.1. You need the average family to have 2.1 kids in order to just maintain your population, unless and unless you have that number, of course, your population is going to decline. And America's under that number, along with several other countries. So, how much would that help the birth rate? I don't know, but certainly that would be some type of incentive to encourage people to have more kids. It is also a fully refundable tax credit, meaning that if you, at the end of the year, owed $4,000 in taxes, but then you had this $6,000 child tax credit, you would actually receive the difference. A lot of people don't realize that when it comes to taxes, about half of Americans don't end up paying any federal income taxes. They may have taxes withheld from their paycheck throughout the year, but when they actually file their taxes and you do the calculation as far as how much they would owe in taxes for the year, and then compare that to the various credits that they qualify for about half of Americans, that offsets. And in a lot of cases, the federal government sends money to people instead of them paying in taxes. The federal government is actually sending money in the form of these fully refundable tax credits, like the child tax credit. So, another proposal from the Harris campaign is to expand the earned income tax credit. This is another, between the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, this is why about half of Americans don't pay any federal income tax, because these credits are fairly generous, particularly if you're in a lower tax bracket. It's going to help to offset really any tax liability that you have. Currently, right now, if you make $63,400 or less and you're married filing jointly, then you would qualify for an earned income tax credit. And the lower your income, the better the credit would actually be. It's only for people that made money during that year. So if you did not work, if you did not earn any money, you do not qualify for this tax credit. But it is also fully refundable. So what the Harris campaign is proposing is, in order to help people who are working but don't make a lot of money, that they would expand that earned income tax credit, because for a lot of people, that tax refund that they get in April or thereabouts is a big boost that actually helps kind of put them over the top for a lot of things throughout the year, whether it's catching up with bills, paying off credit cards, paying for family vacation. For a lot of people, they rely heavily on their tax refund season in order to make ends meet. And so those would be two specific policies that she is proposing. Another tax proposal is the small business tax deduction. Harris has said that she would like to raise the small business tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000. And the goal would be to raise the number of new small businesses that are being created up to 25 million. Now, I think we can all agree that trying to encourage small business and entrepreneurship is really at the core of the American system. We like to encourage people to go into business for themselves. We strongly try to support, especially small business in this country. Adding some tax incentives for small businesses to try to encourage more people to take that jump, take that leap, certainly could be helpful. I think really at this point, so far, looking at child tax credit, earned income tax credit, small business tax deduction, again, trying to be objective me here, all right? I think this would be pretty similar to anything you would actually hear a Republican pose. Nothing so far out of these policy proposals really jump out to me as being very obviously Democrat or very obviously Republican. I think these are things that you could have heard from either side, especially within the primary season. And I would also add, if Harris were to win, I think there's a good chance that these could get passed, even if we have a Republican majority in Congress. I'm going to speak about this a little bit later in the episode, but remember, these are policies that are being proposed by presidential candidates, but ultimately presidents don't create the laws. They have a lot of influence and set the agenda many times for what Congress looks at, but who's in Congress also matters. And I think these are some policies that I could see Republicans and Democrats actually agreeing on and implementing regardless. One other thing on taxes here, Harris has said that she would raise taxes on those who are making over $400,000, but not raise taxes on those that are under that number. Another big policy proposal is she's proposed that she wants to raise the corporate tax rate back up to 28%. So here's what happened. Leading into Donald Trump's presidency, The corporate rate was at 35%. When Donald Trump became president, we had a Republican majority. They passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and temporarily set new tax rates both for personal income tax and for corporate taxes. They took the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%. Joe Biden had at one point proposed potentially bringing that back up to 40. Kamala Harris says that she wants to raise it to 28 and kind of split the difference between what it used to be and what it is now. Also, on the personal income tax side, a big question has been, hey, the Republicans lowered taxes to lower tax brackets for these 8 years. What's going to happen when they're set to expire at the end of 2025? What Harris has said is that she would look to raise taxes on those making over 400,000, but not on those under that number. Does that mean that she would continue the current tax rates or let Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expire, but not raise the tax brackets beyond what they used to be? So I don't know if we've gotten the specifics exactly on that, but those are, at least as far as taxes go, those are some specific policy proposals. Let's jump over to housing now. One thing that Kamala Harris has been talking a lot about on the campaign trail is trying to build more housing and getting housing more affordable. Certainly, that's a pressure that a lot of American families are feeling right now. Home affordability has really gotten out of reach for a lot of people, not just buying a house, but even renting houses. So Kamala Harris is proposing that she's going to be able to get 3 million new rental units built during her term. And the way that she's going to help to do this is by penalizing companies who price fix or hoard homes. There's really not any more specifics given on this, so I can't really speak to the results without the details. But basically, the assertion is that larger corporate builders and developers are colluding to keep rental prices higher because it benefits all of them, or they're holding on to home supply and not releasing that out to the public in order to, influence the price. Again, I really can't speak to a lot of the specifics other than this is just kind of what's been put forward, and there's not a lot of specifics on exactly how that would be accomplished other than we're going to go after the big real estate companies in that way. Now, one specific that has been put forward by the Harris campaign as far as how to make housing more affordable is that she proposes to offer $25,000 for first-time home buyers and potentially even more than that for first-generation home buyers. Now, how would this be done exactly? Probably this would be done in the form of some kind of federal credit that would be applied at closing, similar to how there are child tax credits, electric vehicle tax credits. There's various different types of credits. Potentially, what would be done is at closing, the federal government that credit would be applied to the price of the house. So almost like somebody's coming in and giving you an extra 25 grand towards the cost of closing. I feel like this policy is a very much lower likelihood of happening for several reasons. But this would almost inevitably lead to higher overall prices because buyers almost always will push the upward boundary of their affordability. So if you tell somebody, hey, your price range, your affordability level is 400,000, they're going to start looking at homes in the $400,000 range. And if you tell them, oh, good news, actually now you can afford 450,000, they're probably going to start looking at homes that are 450,000. They're not going to say, oh, that's great. Well, actually, good news. I like these homes at 400,000. I'm just going to stick with that. And then I'll have a little bit more of a cushion. No, they're going to usually try to buy whatever the most is that they can afford. And if you have a new wave of a couple million people with 25 grand more to spend on a house, and they all enter the market at about the same time, it's hard to imagine that that's not going to raise average home prices, right? I mean, the free market is going to adjust to the fact that, hey, if people can afford to spend more, they're most likely going to spend more, and therefore you can sell your home for a little bit more. So on balance, for those who get the credit, maybe it would help them a little bit because not everybody was going to get is going to get the credit. So it's not like necessarily all houses immediately go up by 25 grand, but probably by some amount. And for those who are getting the credit, that's going to help them get a little bit of a leg up on the competition. But there's going to be a lot of people that don't qualify for the credit. And so they're going to be left at a disadvantage. And so really it's just going to be kind of an offset of really just raising the competitiveness of new home buyers versus those who are not first home buyers. Also, another thing that's kind of interesting is trying to define who is a first time home buyer. For other different tax rules about first time home buyers, the rule says that as long as you it's not necessarily you've never ever owned a home. It's just within the last certain number of years. So potentially, could this mean, oh, I haven't bought a home in 10 years, so therefore I qualify as a first time home buyer? Does that mean like literally never ever, or just not recently? That's another thing that I'd like to see a little bit more detail around. All in all, honestly, for me, it seems a little counterintuitive to promise to bring down home prices while also proposing a policy that's going to inevitably inflate home prices. It feels like you're working against each other. And of the different policies that the Harris campaign has promised, I feel like this is one of the least likely to actually get implemented. But of course, we'll just have to see. Okay, let's move now to inflation. Of course, again, these are the types of issues that are top of mind for a lot of people in this election season. Taxes, housing, inflation has hit many American families hard. So some of the things that the Harris campaign has proposed in order to combat inflation: first of all, a federal ban on price gouging for food and groceries. Also, they want to clamp down on pharmaceutical prices. So essentially what the Harris campaign is saying is the big culprit, or at least one of the big culprits in higher prices in the in the economy, is the companies themselves. It's the food and grocery companies, it's the pharmaceutical companies. They're price gouging, they're artificially inflating prices, and it's hitting American families hard. And we need to go after the big companies who are colluding to keep your prices high. Personally, I don't feel like that is the main culprit. Certainly, can you find examples of price gouging? Yes, I'm sure they exist. I'm sure there are some companies that took the excuse of, hey, higher inflation, and you raised their prices even though their bottom line was actually not being hit in the ways that they let on. But particularly in the food and grocery industry, I think it's a much different animal than the pharmaceuticals. Okay, so let's just take let's just take them each in turns. The pharmaceutical industry can be quite crazy because there's a lot of various competing incentives. You have insurance, you have patents, and so the price setting within the pharmaceutical industry is a lot more complicated than things like food. You remember that guy Martin Shkreli? This was a few years ago. I mean, he's still around these days, but he was I think the CEO of a company that he raised the price of this pharmaceutical drug from like $13.50 to $750, like an astronomical price increase. He was called before Congress, and a lot of people hated on him for being just a terrible person to do this. Well, the pharmaceutical industry can have very, very high margins depending on the drug. And really this becomes a question, or can become a question of, should we allow the free market to determine the prices on something that people's health and people's livelihood depend on? That's certainly open for debate, and I know the two sides are going to have that debate, but that's a lot different, I think, than the grocery industry. Because if you know anything about the grocery industry, you know that it's anything but high margin. In fact, grocery stores are some of the lowest margin businesses around because there's plenty of competition and wholesale prices fluctuate quite a lot. So I highly doubt that there are grocery companies that are doing ridiculous price gouging, because you just look at their margins and they're usually pretty razor thin. Pharmaceutical companies may be a different story, and maybe you can find a lot more examples of pharmaceutical companies doing price gouging or artificially inflating prices. The translation is that the federal government would set guidelines on acceptable prices. So in other words, what is the Harris campaign basically saying? How would they even go about doing this? How are they going to make grocery companies or pharmaceutical companies not rip people off? Well, they would have to set sort of guidelines on acceptable prices, or what we call price fixing. for some of the most basic needs of Americans. That, hey, the federal government's going to sort of get intertwined and say, hey, this is the most that you should be able to charge for A, B, or C. But Economics 101 says that when you artificially set low prices that the market cannot bear, it usually leads to a lower supply and or quality of that particular good. If we set prices so low that businesses no longer find it profitable or worth their while, either they're just going to take shortcuts and say, hey, we're just going to drastically reduce the quality of this product in order to make it work for us, or they're going to exit that industry altogether. And when they exit the industry, then that hurts everybody because, again, the supply diminishes. So I think that particular policy proposal would be doing more harm than good. And again, interesting to see if that actually will come to fruition or if this is just more of empty kind of sloganeering and campaigning versus serious policy proposal. Let's also talk really quick about healthcare. Another Harris campaign policy proposal is to increase tax credits to bring health premiums down for those who get coverage through the healthcare marketplace. So as many of you know, if you don't have healthcare available to you through your job, you can go through the healthcare marketplace and shop for a private policy, but then you can get potentially government tax credits to help offset your premiums. So I don't have coverage through my job. I go to the healthcare marketplace. I fill out the application based on my income and my family size and which state I live in. They'll tell me, hey, you qualify for X number of dollars a month to help offset your premium. So maybe the policy itself would cost $800 a month, but I have a $300 a month credit. So therefore, my actual cost is $500 a month. And one of the things that the Harris campaign is proposing is that we inject more money into the tax credits for health premiums so that it makes the cost to the consumer lower, and that the federal government will help pay for more, help subsidize more of that cost to keep healthcare costs low. Also, Harris campaign is proposing to bring down the cap for out-of-pocket costs for those on Medicare. So once you turn 65, you are required to enroll in Medicare. If you are still working, you can also have your workplace healthcare policy as well, but you have to go on Medicare too. And of course, depending on which Medicare plan you pick, and there's many different Medicare plans available to you, but there's different out-of-pocket costs. And so, especially for those that are 65 or older, people that are on fixed income, people that don't have a lot in the way of financial means, having high out-of-pocket costs can be quite a burden. So the idea is we're going to lower those out-of-pocket costs by spending more on healthcare and making it more affordable for people in that regard. I would say the challenge with this is that we're already spending a ton on healthcare as it is. If you look at the federal budget and the federal outlays and what we spend money on each year, a huge chunk of that is healthcare, Medicare. And really, this is just going to bring our spending up in this area. And what Harris is proposing is that what she's going to be able to do is make up for it elsewhere. So yes, we would be spending proportionately a little bit more on healthcare, but we would be bringing in more revenue, and actually even more revenue in. So therefore, that would help offset some of this extra spending. And we're going to talk more about the effect of these proposals on the national debt as well. Now, in all of that, there were lots of other promises on things like lower energy costs and childcare and education and Social Security, etc., but no specific policy recommendations. So I can't really give a lot of commentary there because there's nothing actually for us to sink our teeth into and to actually look at specifics on how that would be accomplished. So that's Kamala Harris's policy proposals. But now let's turn and let's look at Donald Trump's policy proposals. And then at the end of that, I want us to do a side-by-side comparison of how will these policies impact our national debt, which is a very important question to say, hey, how do we get our budget back in line and how do we stop spending more than we're bringing in each year? We're going to look at that in our next episode.